Week 2 of our series, Relationship Reset, where we've been talking about the reality that 2020 has been a pressure cooker for all of our most important relationships, our marriage relationships, our co-worker relationships, our relationships with our kids and who we're dating, our partners, whatever that might look like. It's been a pressure cooker for it, and it's really revealed a lot of cracks, maybe created some cracks in those relationships. And we said this last week, we'll put this up on the screens, that the health of your relationships, they matter to God. I'll go further into this even deeper and say that God wants you to thrive in your relationships more than you do yourself. He really does. He is a good Heavenly Father that wants your relationships to be rich and deep and your connections to be intimate in a beautiful way. That's what God desires for you. We looked at this passage last week, but one time when Jesus was walking the planet, he actually got caught up with some religious leaders that were trying to catch him in a trap, and they asked him, what's the most important thing? And Jesus responded with this. He says, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. Instead of just following some rules written down in a book, when Jesus was asked what's the most important thing, he said relationships are the most important things. Loving the Lord your God, that vertical relationship. Loving your neighbor as yourself, that horizontal relationship. Those were the most important things to him. And if it's the most important things to our Heavenly Father, our relationships, then I think this next statement is true that we'll put up on the screens. That it's impossible for you to be spiritually mature while remaining relationally immature. Your relational maturity and your spiritual maturity, they are intrinsically connected together. And it's impossible for you to grow to be the spiritual person that God's created you to be and for you to be immature relationally. And so that's why we think that it's important for us to talk about this, especially as we're coming to the end of such a tumultuous, crazy 2020. And last week, we talked about pushing the reset button on our connections with each other. We said that even people living in our homes, we can get disconnected from them and we can feel isolated and not feel close to them anymore. And we said the on-ramp to a deeper connection was vulnerability. It's us being vulnerable with each other. And this week, we're going to talk about how to push the reset button in our communication between us and the people that matter the most to us. You know, human communication, I mean, it's a vital part of all of our relationships. I mean, it's shown, studies show that it's the number one reason why people get divorced is because there's a breakdown in communication. When people look at the way our federal government spends money, there's a lot of waste often in these big government programs because somebody misreads an email or they didn't translate the right thing going on. So it's really important in that way. And if you have kids, I mean, there's nothing more frustrating, right, than your kid not listening to you when you're trying to get attention. Get them to pay attention, right? And don't slap your kid next to you or anything like that. But anyway, we're experiencing this right now. Our little guy, Jack Lewis Larison, is a little under 2. And he's obsessed with Hamilton, the musical, so you can judge me all that you guys want. But it's all he wants to watch. He doesn't want to watch Daniel the Tiger. He doesn't want to watch Curious George very often. It's just all about Hamilton, the musical. So much that we'll be in the kitchen and we'll say, like, oh, do you want ham on your sandwich? And he'll start freaking out and run to the TV because he hears ham, right? And if I ever try to get a hold of him, this is what happens. Check out this video. It's his favorite song.
Hey, Jack. Jack.
King George's favorite character.
Jack. Hey, buddy.
Leave me alone.
Hey, dude. Hey, buddy. Hey, Jack.
That's just life. I don't know what it says about us and our parenting that King George is his favorite character in Hamilton, but that's the song he wants all the time. For the longest time, I thought he was saying dad, 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 but he's actually just going dad, 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 dad. He just sings that along all the time. So shout out to my pride right there, right? But maybe you've felt that struggle as a parent, your kid's not paying attention to you, but also put the shoe on the other foot, parents. And if you got kids that can talk and they like to tell those long, rambling stories that never get to the end, maybe you've experienced what Julia Roberts experienced here. When your kids keep telling a story and it won't end, you have those eyes like, yeah? And then is the story going to be over anytime soon, right? And let's take that off the screen. That is completely terrifying, right? But we've all experienced that breakdown in our human communication between people that matter to us the most. And guys, communication between us as humans, it's a complicated thing. I mean, studies from about 50 years ago show that only 7% of our communication with one another are the actual words that we speak. 93% of it There's other things. 38% of our communication is the tone of voice in which people say things. That's how we really communicate, is tone of voice. That's why when your spouse says, I'm fine, it's fine, the only thing you should be sure of is that it's not fine, they're not fine, because the tone of voice. Or when they say, yeesh, I'm sorry, they're not really sorry. They feel like you're ridiculous for being upset in the first place, right? Tone of voice makes our communication so complicated. 55% of our communication to each other is actually body language. It's what we say with our face. It's what we say with our shoulders and how we slunch them over, right? I mean, have you guys ever experienced a good side eye? This is the scariest side eye I've ever seen. This is Samuel L. Jackson from Pulp Fiction. So terrifying. We're not going to show the scene, so we don't have to have the censors up, but that look right there is enough to scare you. And let's take that off the screen because it's horrifying. Any moms in the room, you guys got to admit that there's a mom look that you guys have. It just comes to you when you have children, but you give that look that says, I'm not mad, I'm disappointed, but really I'm mad and disappointed, and you'll never forget this look. You've experienced that look. If you're a mom, I mean, you know how to do it, and we've all experienced it from our mothers, right? A lot is communicated through our body language. But here's the reality. We need to grow in our relationships and communication. And the main way I want to talk about it this morning is that we need to grow in listening to each other. It's the main way that we'll go deeper in our relationships, push that reset button so that we are actually communicating better. We need to learn to listen to each other better. But there's a big problem with that. Because I don't know if you're anything like me, I would much rather talk than listen, right? Am I the only one here? It's much easier to talk than it is to actually listen to somebody. One of the writers from the cartoon The Simpsons, which I think has been on for 35 or so years on Fox, this is what he said about talking and listening. Talking is like drinking a great Cabernet. Listening is like doing squats. Listening is like reading a corporate report. Talking is like eating a cinnamon roll, right? And we would take the cinnamon roll every single time because talking is just more natural to us. We enjoy it more than actually slowing down to listen. Not only that, but science has shown us now that talking about ourselves is one of our most enjoyable human pleasures, talking about ourselves. There was a Harvard University study done where they would do brain scans. So they would basically have you do activity and they could see parts of your brain light up with activity while you were doing it. It's amazing. And do you guys know that the same part of your brain lights up when you eat like comfort foods like fried chicken or your favorite pizza, or if we're in Indiana, chicken and noodles and mashed potatoes and all that carb stuff together. Like the same part of your brain lights up when you eat those comfort foods when you're talking about yourself. It's actually the same part of your brain lighting up if you would have like a hit of cocaine or some hard drug. That's what lights up when you talk about yourself. We are just wired to enjoy talking about ourselves so much more than we want to slow down and listen. But below the surface, I think something sinister can happen when we don't grow in our listening in our greatest and most important relationships. I think this tends to happen right here. That we feel unheard, and that being unheard, it starts to feel like we're unknown. I'm like, they don't listen to me, they're not listening to me, so I feel like they don't really know me. We don't have any intimate connection at all, so I'm gonna hide because I feel unknown. And maybe you've experienced that in a family relationship or in a work relationship where no one's listening to you, so you feel like you're just a cog in the system and nobody really knows you. Maybe you felt that way in your marriage before, or you feel that way with your kids, or maybe you're a kid and you felt that way with your parents, that you just feel unknown by them because they don't really listen to you when you talk. But even deeper and more sinister than this reality, I think this is what happens next. When you feel unknown, you tend to feel unloved. They don't know me because they're not listening to me. They must not love me at all. And this is what I know about you, even though I don't really know you, is that those relationships, those most close personal relationships that you have, you want them to know that you love them because you love them and you want them to experience that love and you want closeness in those relationships. But there's a problem. If we're not growing in our listening, they're not going to feel loved. Author David Osberger said this. I read this last summer. It was so powerful. Being heard is so close to being loved that for the average person, they are almost indistinguishable. Being heard, when you're in a conversation, you see somebody and they are with you in what you're saying and they are listening to you. Oh, it's so close to feeling loved that most people say it's the exact same thing. And I know that's what you want for your most important relationships, but we need to grow in our listening so that we can love better. Just to take us into the scripture, into the narrative of the Bible, I mean, this idea of listening was such a powerful and foundational idea to the character of God from the very beginning. You see, in the ancient world, before there was the Bible, there were lots of communities, lots of tribes and nations all over the place, and they all had their own version of God with a little g. They all had their own sacred texts, their own version of what the Bible would be for their little religion. They all interacted with this invisible deity in different ways. And what was fascinating about this ancient world and all these ancient deities is that they all had this similarity that the gods, the little g gods, they didn't care about the people on earth. They didn't have compassion on them. They were merciless towards them. They didn't ever listen to their cries, their prayers. They just wanted to make sure that they were doing enough for them as being the gods. And they were unpredictable. They were in a way capricious, and any moment they could strike them with lightning. And this is what the realm of this ancient world was until the God of the Bible shows up on the scene. And very near to the beginning of the biblical story in the book of Genesis, chapter 16, we're introduced to a woman by the name of Hagar. And Hagar finds herself in the middle of this family drama she never asked to be a part of. And she's crying out to God in the desert, saying, God, I need you to relieve me from this agony of this family drama that I'm in the middle of. And she cries out to God, and she names God this name that we'll put up on the screens, El Shammah. And this means the God who listens. This is who she believed God to be, the God who hears us, the God who listens. And so when the world is introduced to the God of the Israelites, the God of the Old Testament, the God of our Bible, he's different. He's the God who listens. He's the God who hears. Going a book into the Bible further in the book of Exodus, we find God's people, the Israelites, being enslaved by the Egyptian empire for 430 years, generation after generation after generation. But when we're introduced to God in the book of Exodus, which many scholars believe to be the very first book of the Bible written, actually, this is what we're told in Exodus chapter 3, verse 7. This is how we're introduced to the God of the Bible. The Lord said that I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. And this is so important. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. This is El Shammah, the God who hears, the God who listens, who hears the cries of his people. This God is different than all the gods that are ancestors, all the other gods of the other nations. He is El Shammah, the God who hears. And to fast forward about 4,000, 5,000 years from the book of Exodus, we have Jesus walking on planet Earth. And we believe that Jesus was God in human form, the eternal Son of God, become a baby and then a man walking on planet Earth. And my friends, if you ever want to know what God is like, look at the person of Jesus, because he is the real deal in human flesh. And when we see Jesus walk on planet Earth, he is the God who listens in powerful form and gives us an incredible example to follow of being a listening people. So I want to take us this morning to one of the biographies of Jesus called the Gospel of Luke. Luke was a medical doctor, we're told, and he actually got all of his information for the book of Luke by interviewing eyewitnesses to all these accounts of Jesus' miracles, Jesus' teaching, and Jesus' resurrection. And he's got all these meticulous notes. And if you look at it compared to other Gospels, it's interesting because there's tons of little details, because this dude was a doctor and he took really good notes. And so I want to go into one of his accounts that he recorded in Luke chapter 18, where we see Jesus being an incredible listener. So this is where we pick up. As Jesus approached Jericho, a blind man was sitting by the roadside begging. When he heard the crowd going by, he asked what was happening. They told him, Jesus of Nazareth is passing by. Now, Jesus and his crew, they're on their way to Jericho, right? They were approaching Jericho. They had things to do, people to see, miracles to perform, a kingdom of God to proclaim. They were in the middle of going somewhere, and people had started to hear about Jesus and all that he was doing, so there started to be this huge crowd follow him. And many scholars believe they were in this one corridor approaching Jericho, where it was like a big hallway where there's just a horde of people shoulder to shoulder walking out. Imagine walking out of Lucas Oil Stadium after a Colts game, or Bankers Life after a Pacers game, when everybody's going to the exit at the same time and there's big crowds. Does that freak you guys out in 2020? I can't imagine that ever again, right? But this is what's happening. Jesus and his entourage is walking, approaching Jericho, and there's a blind beggar who just hears all this commotion. I mean, you hear all these congruent conversations, you hear all the footsteps all together, and he's like, what is going on? He's told Jesus of Nazareth is walking by. And you can imagine in that moment, because this blind beggar, he's heard about Jesus, but he's like, oh man, maybe this is my shot for there to be a change in my story forever. And so this is what the blind beggar does. We're told this next. He called out, Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. Now, this was like a futile attempt to try to get Jesus' attention, right? I mean, there's a huge crowd, lots of conversations happening, the hustling and the bustling going through this corridor, and he calls out. I mean, actually, the verb in the original language here in the New Testament, called out, means that he cried out, he screamed, he made a big scene, a large commotion over the noise of the crowd. And he says, Jesus, son of David, Jesus, you're the Messiah that we're waiting for. Have mercy on me. He makes a huge scene, just desperate to get Jesus' attention. And some of the people leading Jesus' entourage, they weren't having it. And this is what they say next. Those who led the way rebuked him, scolded him, told him to be quiet. But look at the desperation and the determination here. But he shouted all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. This guy thought this was my one chance, my one opportunity to have my story changed forever because I've heard about what Jesus can do. I'm going to try to get this guy's attention. I'm not going to stop until I get this guy's attention. And this is when you think there's just no way he'll do this. Jesus was on his way to do something else. His entourage is trying to shut this guy up. What is going to happen here? And in this moment, you see just a little glimpse into the heart of God, in Jesus' heart towards people, towards us. And this is what Jesus does next. We're told this, that Jesus stopped and he ordered the man to be brought to him. Jesus had plans. He had a big agenda. He had to get to Jericho, but Jesus stopped. And he let himself be interrupted. Do you guys know that over 50% of all the miracles that Jesus performed in the biographies of Jesus we have, the Gospels, they were when Jesus was on the way to do something else, but he was interrupted? And I don't know about you, but I don't like being interrupted. I mean, when I'm interrupted, when I've got an agenda in front of me, I've got a lot of stuff to do, the last lens that I'm looking at people with is compassion, to slow down and hear what they have to say. It's annoying to me, if I can be honest. But Jesus, he stopped. He stopped and he wanted to see this person. He let himself be interrupted. You know, a couple weeks ago, Nico, our next gen pastor, talked about how Jesus, at Jesus' baptism, he was told that he was the beloved Son of God and he never forgot it. One of the powerful things about Jesus is he never forgot his identity as being a beloved Son of God. And in a different way, Jesus never forgot that every person he made eye contact with, every person he ever saw, was made in the image of God, and they all mattered deeply to God. So Jesus was okay with being interrupted because he wanted to look every person in the eye and remind them that they were made in the image of God. It's a beautiful thing. And so we're told that, Jesus' entourage, they probably have to carry this blind beggar to Jesus, and we're told this next. When he came near, Jesus asked him a question. What do you want me to do for you? Now, this is where you might be like, Jesus, like you're supposed to be God. You already know everything, right? Why did you have to ask this question? And I think Jesus is really giving us a lesson here. He's teaching us not to assume, not to judge, not to just listen to reply, but he wants to slow down, stop, and just ask the guy a simple question, not to interpret, not to judge. Jesus wants to enter into somebody else's world, to show them that they matter and truly listen to them, not to assume anything, but to truly be in it with them. And he slows down, and you can imagine the crowd around him like, what is going on? It's getting awkward now. But Jesus looks him in the eye, probably bends down to look this blind man in the eye, asks him the question, and then the man responds with this. He says, Lord, I want to see. Lord, I want to see. And again, in our 2020 lens, you might be saying like, oh, duh, he's a blind guy. He wants to see. But there was so much happening here I don't want you to miss. This was a man from the day he was born. Couldn't see, and in the ancient world, that meant he was cut off from every form of society. This was a grown man for his entire life. He couldn't go to temple. He couldn't go to school and learn. He couldn't worship in the temple. He was cut off from not only school, but he was cut off from worshiping God and having any kind of religion. He was cut off from the economy. He couldn't have a job. And he was cut off from all of society because he was told from the very beginning of his life that you must have done something wrong to tick God off. Or maybe your parents did something and you're paying for your parents' uncleanliness and what they did and their impurity. This is someone so covered with shame, somebody who is completely cut off from the world. And he says, I want to see. And when he says, I want to see, he says, I want to be seen by people for who I really am. I want to be seen by my heavenly Father as worship. I want to be seen for my gifts and the abilities that I have. I want to see and I want to be seen. It was so much. And Jesus slowed down to ask him the question. And then we're told that Jesus was moved to action in the end of this passage. Jesus said to him, receive your sight, your faith, your trust in who I am has healed you. And immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus, praising God. When all the people saw it, they also praised God. You guys, don't miss this. Jesus slowed down. He listened. He made eye contact. He asked questions to understand better. And then he was moved to action and loved. And more so than just an account of something that happened 2,000 odd years ago, my friends, this is what Jesus has done for me. And if you're a follower of Jesus, part of his family, this is what he's done for you. When I was blind, when I couldn't see my own error, when I couldn't see myself the way he saw me, he slowed down. He saw me. He heard my cry. He brought me sight again. He saw me and he brought me sight. He put me into the fold of his mission and his family. That is what he's done for each and every one of us. Our God is El Shammah, the God who hears, the God who listens to us and slows down long enough to do it. So that's what I want to encourage us to do, is to imitate Jesus in this way of being better listeners in our relationships. And so the next part of this talk, I just got to give a shout out to Pete and Jerry Scazzera, who are pastors in the New York City area. They wrote a book 7 or 8 years ago called Emotionally Healthy Relationships, when they talk about growing in our listening. And this was so helpful, some of their steps. So that's what I want to share with you, because let's make this practical. Let's put meat on the bones of what it looks like to be better listeners in our marriages and with our kids, with our coworkers, with our family members. And let's follow Jesus while we do it. The first challenge they give us, and I want to give you this morning, is to give your full attention to the people that are talking to you. Give your full attention to them. And to talk about this, we've got to go to the Christmas story, right? I know it's not Thanksgiving yet, but we're going to talk a little bit about Christmas this morning, because this is what Jesus did for us. Jesus, who was sitting at the right hand of God the Father in heaven, he entered into our story. He left the splendor of heaven, entered into our story. And as one of his closest friends, John, the beloved disciple, said in this passage at the very beginning of his biography of Jesus, this gospel, he says, the Word, Jesus, became flesh, he became human, and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. My friends, this is what I have highlighted there, made his dwelling among us. It doesn't mean that he set up like a little bit of a camp just for a night. No, he fully entered in, immersed himself into our humanity. He gave him his whole self to be present with us, to be here with us. Am I the only one that sometimes I can be present physically, but I'm not here emotionally when I'm talking to somebody or when they're talking to me? It's easy for us to be physically present, but it's a whole different thing to go all in and give our full selves to listen to somebody. I mean, it's really easy to be in a room with somebody, but looking over their shoulder to see the election returns. Or it's really easy to be listening to somebody, but we get a notification. We feel like in that moment, I've got to respond to this text message, right? I think one way that we can follow Jesus and push the reset button on our relationships is to fully give our attention to the people that are listening to us. Put the phone down, turn the smartwatch off, just be making eye contact with them and be fully present with them, because this is what Jesus did for us through the incarnation, through Christmas. So we can follow him, we can imitate him by being fully there with people. I was at a conference with some of our team this last Thursday at a church in Indianapolis, and we were having lunch, and they, because this was a church conference, they provided the Christian chicken, the gospel bird, Chick-fil-A for us. And so we were sitting there having lunch, and there was an older gentleman who sat down at our table with our team. So it was just our team and this older gentleman. He sat across the table, and he started to talk to us, and he had a quieter voice. He was hard to hear, and it really wasn't a conversation. It became a monologue. He was just talking, and about halfway through the conversation, if I can be honest with you, I started checking out mentally. I started thinking about what was happening next at the conference. I did every trick in the book, like jingling my keys, boxing up my lunch, moving my chair away from the table, thinking, I got to have an excuse to get out of here, like I need to clean grandma's garage or something. I just need to get out of this conversation. And if I can be honest with you, I was not present in that moment. I was thinking, how do I get out of the conversation? I'm sure that you've been there in your relationships as well. But I want to challenge you to give your full attention to those that are talking to you. That's a way that we listen like Jesus. The next step I want to give you is this: to step into their shoes. Grow in your emotional empathy when people are talking to you. Try to imagine, to see the world through their eyes, to think through their experiences. It's a powerful step to take. The author of Hebrews says that this is what Jesus did for us. He didn't just say, I know what it's like to be human. He experienced what it was like to be human in every way. He says this: for we do not have a high priest, we do not have a God who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way just as we are, yet he did not sin. Think about this, you guys. Whatever you've experienced in your life, Jesus has experienced it as well. He can empathize with you. Have you been betrayed? Jesus knows what it's like. Have you felt deep pain, hurt? He knows what it's like. Loss and grief. He knows what it's like. Even uncertainty, he knows what it's like. He can empathize with you. One way that we can imitate Jesus is by empathizing with people that we're talking to, especially people that have got different experiences than we have. I mean, it would be a beautiful thing in our listening if, even if we don't agree with what somebody's saying to us, we said something like this: if I experienced what you did, the way you did, I would probably see things the way that you see things. What a powerful idea for us to enter in and listen with, right? Not that we have to agree with what everybody says, but we could grow in empathy with a sentence like this: if I experienced what you did, the way you did, I would probably see things the way that you see things. Let me step onto a soapbox just for a second, because we're just right on the edge of a political season. Can you imagine the dialogue and the connections we could have and the coming together instead of being divisive if instead of standing on one side and yelling over the fence or the wall to another person, we tried to listen to them and try to see things the way that they see things? Saying, man, if I experienced life the way that you did that experience, I would probably see things the way that you see things as well. I think it'd be an incredible thing for our communities, for our state, for our nation, if we would grow in this emotional empathy by trying to step into someone's shoes, see the world through their eyes. The last step that the Scazzerios give us, I think it's so powerful: avoid judging or interpreting. Am I the only one that I can come to conclusions quickly when someone's talking? And often I am like, putting my response together in my head before they're even done talking. I'm not listening to them. I'm just ready to respond. Am I the only one that's a quick fixer? I don't really listen. I'm thinking about the steps people need to take before they're even done talking. Am I the only one? Please tell me I'm not the only one, right? It's so easy for us to judge people while they're talking, be like, yeah, that's where you made the wrong move, or interpret what they're saying to fit our life's experiences and narratives. And I think wisdom from Jesus' brother James would come handy here. This is what James says in chapter 1, verse 19 and 20 of his New Testament letter. He says, my dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. Man, I wish this wasn't in the Bible. I mean, if I could be real with you, I wish this wasn't in the Bible, because if you guys know me very well or not, I am somebody who was born with a silver foot in my mouth. I am a talk first, think through later, and I am not quick to listen. I am fast to listen, or I'm fast to speak and really slow to listen, and it becomes problems all the time in my relationships. Just this last week, I was experiencing this week. My wife and I just got jacked down for bed, and we just had a couple moments to talk to each other. And she was just going right into an experience she had at work. She's a nurse at a local hospital and working with administration some and technology. And she was just kind of just unloading about one of her frustrations at work. And the whole time I'm thinking, okay, well, have you tried this? Maybe you should do this next. Or maybe you should do this. Maybe you shouldn't have done that. And I'm judging, and I'm trying to play fixer throughout the conversation. I'm not listening to her at all. So when she's done talking, I give her my 3-step plan to change everything. And she basically just grabs me by the face, like metaphorically. She's like, I don't need you to fix it. I need you to listen to me and just sit with me and tell me this stinks. Can I get an amen? Anybody else been there, right? Like, that's where I am so often. What would happen if we took a cue from Jesus and took a cue from this ancient wisdom from his brother James, and just like we slowed down? We didn't listen to respond, but we listened to understand and to sit there in the mess with them. Paul Tillich, who is a theologian and author, I love this quote from him. It struck me this last month when I read it. The first duty of love is to listen. The first action of love is to listen, not to come in with our plans to fix something, not to judge, not to just change everything for them. The first duty of love is to slow down and listen. What could happen in your relationships if you loved people by listening? Because remember, the normal people, they can't even tell the difference because feeling heard is just like being loved. At this conference I was at Thursday, it was awesome to be with our team and lots of different leaders from around the state. And the whole theme of the conference was racial justice and listening to people of different stories, and how can the church lead in conversations about the disparity of minorities in our country and how they're treated, and how can the church actually play a role in bringing people together. And so the whole conference was listening to these like TED Talk style talks from people of different walks of life, different experiences, different skin tones, and different ethnicities. And then we'd have around our little round table, we'd have about a 30-minute discussion about it. And one of the themes over and over and over again from people that don't look like me as they explain and describe their walk and their life in our country was, I just wish you would listen to me and believe my experience. We don't need you to come in and fix everything. Can things just start by listening to us and believing our experience and being empathetic with our experience? And I thought to myself, oh my goodness. So often I come in guns blazing thinking I'm going to fix everything, that I can come in and change everything, and I'm not even really listening to people. And I thought about Christians and our reputation in our country. And man, Christians are known for a lot of things. I don't think I've ever heard somebody talk about Jesus people and be like, you know what, Christians, they're great listeners. No, we do a lot of talking, and here I am, the guy with the microphone. We do a lot of talking. We don't do a great job of listening. What if, you guys, our little corner of the kingdom, our community here, Bridgeway, what if we were known for being great listeners? Not for judging people while they talk to us, not by interpreting, but by being empathetic and giving them our full attention, trying to see things through their eyes, walk a mile in their shoes. What could happen? I think we would just inch closer to the dream that God has for the human race. And I think that your marriage, your family, your home, your workplace, we would all just inch closer to God's dream for us. Because God's inviting us to push the reset button on our communication and to listen better, because the first duty of love is to listen. May we be people like that. May I be a person like that. Let's pray together.